Do you believe love can blossom in the midst of chaos? That, in the deepest darkness, an unexpected light can emerge and transform everything? Have you ever imagined discovering that every pillar of your existence, every truth you fervently embraced, every achievement you defended tooth and nail, was, in fact, a mirage? That everything you built with so much sweat and sacrifice, everything you placed your unwavering faith in, everything you believed to be your essence, could crumble in a matter of hours, leaving behind only ruins and a deafening void? Today, you won't just hear a story, you'll dive into the soul of Eleanor Vance, a woman who not only lost everything, absolutely everything that defined her identity in the outside world, but who, in the process, also lost herself. She hit rock bottom, an abyss of despair and loneliness where hope seemed a distant illusion. And when she thought she had nothing left to lose, that emptiness was her only companion, she found redemption. But this redemption didn't come from where she imagined, nor from the sources she tirelessly sought throughout her life. It didn't come from the ephemeral glow of money, nor the hollow recognition of success, nor the external validation she so craved and for which she sacrificed so much. No. Eleanor's redemption came from a much deeper, more authentic, more real place. It came from within, from a space she had kept locked away, and from human connections she had neglected for an entire lifetime. But before we embark together on this transformative journey, I want to know from you, from which city in the United States are you joining us? What is your location right now, as you prepare to immerse yourself in this narrative? Write it down in the comments whether it's New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Houston, Miami, or any other corner of our vast country. No matter where you are, your presence and your city are also part of this story, connecting us in a web of experiences and emotions. And, please, subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss the next emotional stories coming your way. Stories of real people, of hearts opening to the unexpected, of lives transforming in ways we could never predict. Stay until the end, because this story isn't just about Eleanor, it's about each one of us. It will make you rethink what truly matters in life, force you to question the priorities you carry every day, often without realizing the weight they impose. It will show you, with painful yet liberating clarity, that sometimes, we need to lose everything, every piece of our armor, every illusion of control, to finally find what's truly worthwhile, what truly nourishes the soul and gives meaning to existence. So, take a deep breath, get comfortable wherever you are, and come with me on this journey. A journey that promises to be intense, emotional, and, above all, profoundly human. Eleanor Vance was the kind of woman who, upon entering any room, immediately commanded attention and respect. It wasn't just her classic beauty, her impeccably styled brown hair, or her elegant posture, it was the aura of power and determination that enveloped her, an almost palpable force that inspired admiration and, paradoxically, a certain fear. At 38, she wasn't just a successful businesswoman, she was the director and founder of Green Essence, a natural cosmetics company based in New York City that had become, in record time, an unquestionable benchmark in the market. And we're not talking about a small company, a modest venture. Far from it. Green Essence was a powerhouse, a titan in the sector. With strategically located branches in Los Angeles, Chicago, and Dallas, the company raked in millions annually, expanding its influence and product portfolio every quarter. And all of this, every cent that came in, every innovative product launched, every satisfied customer who became a brand ambassador, was a direct result of Eleanor's strategic vision, relentless determination, and, yes, calculated coolness. She was the mastermind behind every major decision, the driving force that propelled the company forward, never looking back. Her discipline was legendary, almost unyielding. Her competitors feared her, not just for her intelligence and market aggression, but for her ability to anticipate moves and constantly innovate. Her employees respected her deeply, but also feared her, aware that Eleanor tolerated no failures or mediocrity. Her investors admired her, seeing in her the personification of success and profitability. And the media? Oh, the media adored Eleanor Vance. She was a goldmine for business magazines and talk shows. The Queen of Natural Cosmetics, headlines proclaimed. The woman who turned a dream into an empire, articles declared, painting a portrait of an almost mythical, unattainable figure. But behind all that facade of success and power, no one, absolutely no one knew who Eleanor Vance truly was. The woman behind the public persona was an enigma, a labyrinth of layers carefully constructed to protect a vulnerable and, often, solitary interior. She lived alone in a luxurious apartment in the exclusive Upper East Side, one of New York City's most sophisticated neighborhoods. The apartment was impeccable, a true sanctuary of minimalist design and understated elegance. Everything was in its right place, every object perfectly aligned, every surface gleaming. It was a space of aseptic perfection, almost cold. It looked more like a high-end interior design magazine showroom than a home where a person actually lived, breathed, and felt. There were no personal photos on the walls, no family portraits, no records of joyful moments or affection. There were no plants, no touch of organic life that could break the calculated symmetry. There was nothing to suggest that a person with emotions, with memories, with a history, truly inhabited that space. It was a reflection of her own life, organized, controlled, but devoid of human warmth. Her days began before 6 in the morning. Always before 6. The alarm clock, a discreet and melodic sound, was merely a reminder, as her mind was already active, planning the hours ahead. Eleanor would wake up, brew a strong, black, unsweetened coffee, a daily ritual that anchored her to reality, and then dedicate herself to a series of exercises she had planned with an engineer's precision. 45 minutes of intense weight training, 30 minutes of treadmill running, 15 minutes of yoga to stretch and calm her mind. Everything timed, everything precise, every movement executed with an almost robotic determination. Then, a cold shower, a practice she believed kept her alert and focused, a shock to the system that prepared her for the day's battles, and then, work began. Eleanor's agenda was a testament to her dedication and relentless pursuit of results. Strategic meetings with the board, crucial decisions about the company's future, meticulous market analyses to identify new opportunities and threats. Complex negotiations with international suppliers, ensuring the quality and sustainability of ingredients. Conferences with the marketing team, outlining upcoming campaigns and communication strategies. International calls with partners and investors across different time zones. All of this before lunch. And after lunch? More of the same, but with even greater intensity. More meetings, more high-stakes decisions, more pressure to exceed targets and expand the empire. She had no time for distractions. No time for friends, and, to be honest, she had no friends. Her relationships were strictly professional, based on mutual interests rather than affection. No time for family, and her relationship with her adoptive parents was distant, formal, based on social obligations and protocol visits, devoid of any warmth or intimacy. No time for hobbies, for leisure, for those little things that normal people do to feel alive, to nourish the soul. Work was her life, her purpose, her identity. And, until then, that was enough. Or at least that's what Eleanor told herself, repeating the phrase like a mantra to ward off any doubt or feeling of emptiness that might arise. There was one person, however, who tried, with almost heroic persistence, to break this iron routine. Her name was Sonia, and she had been Eleanor's personal assistant for over 5 years. Sonia was a woman in her early 40s, a widow raising a young daughter alone. She was Eleanor's antithesis, attentive, dedicated, with a big heart and that rare quality of genuinely caring about the people around her, even her most demanding boss. Every day, Sonia tried to get Eleanor to eat something other than her routine salad and grilled chicken, suggesting more nutritious, tastier dishes. Every day, she would suggest, with the utmost delicacy, that Eleanor leave the office earlier, that she take some time for herself. Every day, she tried to remind Eleanor that there was more to life than work, more than numbers and targets. And every day, Eleanor ignored her, or responded with a coolness that cut through the air. "Sonia, you're very kind," Eleanor would say, with that polished, professional tone she used with everyone, an impenetrable barrier. "But I don't need looking after. I need results. And you, as my assistant, need to help me achieve them." Sonia would just smile, that sad smile of someone who loves another who doesn't know how to receive love, of someone who sees the pain behind the armor and kept trying, with an unwavering faith in her boss's humanity. She would leave a note with an inspiring quote on Eleanor's desk, or a small treat she knew Eleanor liked, even if she never ate it. Small gestures of kindness that, most of the time, went unnoticed. Behind the image of the unshakable woman, the queen of natural cosmetics, however, lay an exhausted soul. Eleanor slept little, 4-5 hours a night, at most, and even then her sleep was restless, populated by strategies and worries. She ate poorly, despite obsessively maintaining her physical fitness, prioritizing efficiency over pleasure. She lived under constant pressure, that pressure you feel in your shoulders, your jaw, your chest, like an invisible weight that doesn't let you breathe properly, that slowly suffocates you. She trusted no one. Not her executives, whom she obsessively supervised, reviewing every report, questioning every decision. Not her consultants, whom she constantly interrogated, looking for flaws in their analyses. Not even Sonia, despite all Sonia did for her, all her loyalty and dedication. Eleanor believed that trust was weakness, an open door to vulnerability, to betrayal. And she couldn't afford to be weak. So she continued. Day after day, week after week, month after month. Building her empire, expanding her business, conquering new markets. Always forward. Always higher. Always more. The relentless pursuit of more was what drove her, what gave meaning to her existence. But life, sometimes, has other ideas. Ideas that challenge our most meticulous plans, that deconstruct our certainties and force us to look within. It all began to crumble on a Monday morning. An ordinary Monday, like any other, with the New York City sun already warming the streets and the city's routine in full swing. Eleanor was in her office, on the 32nd floor of a mirrored building downtown, the panoramic view of the metropolis stretching below her, a symbol of her dominance. She was reviewing a complex financial report, her mind as sharp as ever, when the phone rang. It was her press agent, Mark, and his voice, usually calm and professional, was tinged with poorly disguised panic. "Eleanor, we have a problem," he said, and the gravity in his voice sent a chill down Eleanor's spine, though she didn't show it. An anonymous tip had reached the press. It wasn't just any tip, it was a serious accusation, with the potential to destroy everything Eleanor had built. It accused Green Essence of using toxic ingredients in its products, specifically, a preservative that had been banned in several countries for being potentially carcinogenic. The preservative's name was mentioned, with technical details that lent credibility to the accusation. Eleanor felt the ground disappear beneath her feet, a momentary vertigo she quickly suppressed. But she didn't let it show. Her voice remained calm, controlled, the iron mask firmly in place. "How much time do we have?" she asked, her mind already processing scenarios and crisis containment strategies. 2 hours, maybe 3, before the news explodes on social media and becomes uncontrollable, Mark replied, his voice still tense. 2 hours. Eleanor had faced crises before. She knew how to handle them. Her mind, trained for corporate warfare, began firing off orders and plans. Emergency meeting with the legal team to assess the extent of the damage and possible legal actions. Preparation of an official statement vehemently denying the accusations, with data and proof of the company's innocence. Immediate and transparent internal audit to refute the allegations. Everything planned, everything controlled, as always. But this time, things were different. The speed of information in the digital age was an enemy she had underestimated. In a few hours, not days, not weeks, but a few hours, the news spread like wildfire. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, WhatsApp groups. Social media exploded with furious criticism, boycott hashtags, and derogatory memes. Influencers who once praised the brand, who had built their careers around green essence products, now attacked it with the same vehemence, fearing negative repercussions on their own images. Customers demanded explanations, refunds, compensation. Investigative journalists, hungry for a scandal, began digging deeper, unearthing any trace of irregularity, real or imagined. And then came the real consequences, the blows that struck the company's financial heart. Multi-million-dollar contracts were suspended, leaving entire projects in limbo. Major department store chains and pharmacies pulled green essence products from their shelves, fearing contamination of their own reputations. The long-awaited investment from a Chinese group, an investment Eleanor had personally negotiated for months, with exhausting trips and negotiation rounds that stretched into the early hours, an investment that would double the company's size and catapult it into the global market, evaporated like smoke, leaving a trail of frustration and debt. Eleanor tried to maintain control. More emergency meetings, now with the crisis team working 24/7. More official statements, each more desperate than the last. Internal audits that, although they found no toxic preservative, were not enough to quell the public's fury. She worked 48 hours straight, without sleep, fueled only by coffee and adrenaline, trying to contain the damage. But the damage was already done. The company's image, built with so much effort, with so much sacrifice, over 15 years of relentless dedication, was in tatters, reduced to ashes by the bonfire of public opinion. And then, 3 days after the accusation, with the company in freefall and her own energy draining away, Eleanor was giving a crucial presentation to a group of investors who, by a thread of hope, were still considering supporting the company. She was speaking, explaining, defending green essence with the last drop of her strength, her voice hoarse with exhaustion, but still firm. Suddenly, in the middle of a sentence, she felt the world begin to spin. Her vision blurred, as if a dense fog had descended over her eyes. Her ears began to ring, a sharp, incessant sound that muffled the voices around her. She tried to keep speaking, tried to cling to reality, but the words no longer came out, trapped in her throat. And then, everything went black. Eleanor fainted, falling heavily to the conference room floor, before all those investors she so desperately needed to convince, before all those eyes that now saw her not as the queen of natural cosmetics, but as a fragile, defeated woman. She woke up in a private hospital, the smell of antiseptic invading her nostrils, the sound of machines and tubes filling the silence of the room. There was a heart monitor beeping constantly beside her, a monotonous rhythm that seemed to echo the irregular beat of her own heart. There was an IV drip connected to her arm, the cold needle piercing her skin, and a nurse by her side, checking her vital signs with a serious expression. The tests were quick, almost brutal in their urgency. CT scans, MRIs, detailed blood analyses. Everything done with a swiftness that indicated the gravity of the situation. And then the doctor entered the room, a woman in her 50s, with gray hair pulled back in a bun, a compassionate but firm gaze that left no room for doubt, and Eleanor knew, deep in her soul, that the news was not good. "Eleanor, the results indicate acute myeloid leukemia," the doctor said, sitting in the chair beside the bed, her voice soft, but laden with weight. Eleanor didn't ask what it was. She already knew. She had read about it, somewhere, sometime, on one of those sleepless nights when her mind wandered through random information. Blood cancer. Serious. Potentially fatal. The words echoed in her mind, cold and relentless as a sentence. Treatment needs to start immediately, the doctor continued, her voice now more urgent. Aggressive chemotherapy. Isolation to protect your compromised immune system. And, if possible, a bone marrow transplant. We need to find a compatible donor as soon as possible. Eleanor didn't cry. Didn't ask why. Didn't panic. She just nodded her head, that mechanical nod she made in meetings when someone presented a problem she needed to solve, a challenge she needed to overcome. Her mind, even in shock, was already beginning to formulate a battle plan against the disease. How much time, she asked, her voice a hoarse whisper. To start treatment? Today. Even today. We can't waste time. No, doctor, Eleanor corrected, her voice gaining a thread of desperation. How much time do I have? The doctor hesitated, a look of pity crossing her face. Without treatment? Weeks, perhaps months. With treatment, well, it depends on many factors. It's a tough battle, Eleanor, but we have hope. Medicine has advanced a lot. Hope. Eleanor had never believed in hope. She believed in action, in planning, in control, in numbers and results. But hope? That was for weak people, for those who lacked the strength to fight. And yet, deep inside, something in her broke. A deep crack in her armor, revealing the fragility she had hidden for so long. That night, alone in the hospital room, under the cold, impersonal light, Eleanor Vance, the Iron Woman, the queen of natural cosmetics, the woman who had never cried, who prided herself on her unshakable composure, finally wept. She cried silently, her face turned to the wall, so no one would see, so the nurse who came and went wouldn't witness her fall. The tears streamed down, hot and bitter, washing away years of repression, unexpressed pain, accumulated loneliness. She had lost her company, her empire, her reputation. She had lost her professional identity, what defined her in the world. And now she was losing her health. Her life. Everything she had built, everything she had believed in, had crumbled in the blink of an eye, leaving her naked and vulnerable before her own mortality. Chaos had arrived, and with it, the certainty that she had no control over anything at all. It was in this moment of despair and helplessness that Michael entered the scene. He wasn't a doctor, nor a therapist, nor a longtime friend. Michael was a 45-year-old man, with a life story marked by challenges and overcoming. A former military man, he had served in peacekeeping missions in conflict zones, where life and death mingled in a cruel dance. He had left the army years ago, tired of the violence, tired of seeing death, of carrying the weight of losses. He wanted a simpler, quieter life, away from the noise and brutality of the world. Driving for a ride-sharing app allowed him that freedom, flexibility, and the possibility of meeting people, of observing life from a different perspective, without the weight of military responsibility. He was hastily hired by Sonia, Eleanor's loyal assistant, who was desperate to find someone who could drive Eleanor to her numerous medical appointments. Someone reliable, discreet, who wouldn't ask questions, who would respect her boss's silence and pain. Sonia, with her keen intuition, knew that Eleanor needed more than a driver, she needed a stable presence, a safe harbor in the midst of the storm. Michael was exactly that. The first time he saw Eleanor, he immediately realized that she wasn't just a powerful woman, a successful businesswoman. She was scared. There was something in her eyes, an emptiness, a desperation well disguised by a last layer of pride, but which he recognized because he had seen that same look in many comrades in arms, in many civilians who had lost everything in the midst of war. It was the look of someone who had lost control, who was on the brink of an abyss. Michael was a man of few words. He had learned, over the years, that sometimes silence was more powerful than any word, that a silent presence could communicate more than 1,000 speeches. He had a firm and serene gaze, one of those who have seen the worst of life and still move forward, with a quiet resilience. There was no judgment in his eyes. There was no pity, which Eleanor detested. Only understanding, a calm acceptance of reality, no matter how harsh it was. On the first day, Eleanor got into the car without saying anything, her expression closed, her body fragile. Michael just drove. He didn't try to make small talk, didn't try to be friendly or intrusive. He just drove, safely, carefully, and left Eleanor with her thoughts, with her pain, with her silence. "Do you know the way?" Eleanor asked, after a few minutes, her voice hoarse. "Yes," Michael replied, his tone calm and professional. Nothing more was said during that drive. Just the sound of the engine and the heavy silence between them. But the next day, when Michael arrived to pick her up, Eleanor was visibly weaker from her first chemotherapy session. Her steps were slow, her body trembled slightly. Michael saw her struggle to open the car door, to settle into the seat. He simply helped her, gently, without making a big fuss about it, without drawing attention to her fragility. He held her arm, a firm and respectful touch, guided her to the car, and helped her settle into the back seat, carefully adjusting the seatbelt. "Thank you," Eleanor said, surprised by the naturalness and delicacy of the gesture. It was something she hadn't received in years, perhaps ever. Michael just nodded, a small movement of his head that was worth more than 1,000 words. Day after day, week after week, Michael was there. A constant, unshakable presence. When Eleanor had to go for chemotherapy, he would drive her, wait for her for hours in the waiting room, reading a book or just observing the movement. When she came home exhausted, nauseous and in pain, he would help her get in, climb the stairs, get settled. When she had medical appointments, he would accompany her to the doctor's office door, always at a respectful distance, but visibly present. And he never asked anything. Never asked questions about her illness, about her company, about her personal life. He was just there. Present. Silent. But present. There was something in that presence that began to change Eleanor, to break down the barriers she had erected over a lifetime. Something in that lack of judgment, in that silent acceptance of who she was at that moment, a sick, vulnerable woman who had lost everything. For the first time in her life, Eleanor didn't have to be strong. She didn't have to have all the answers. She didn't have to control everything. She could just be. Be fragile, be human, be imperfect. And Michael, with his calm presence, allowed her to be. Meanwhile, the battle against the disease progressed, and with it, the urgent need for a bone marrow transplant. Eleanor began a silent and desperate search for compatible donors. Her adoptive mother, an elderly and frail woman, was tested first, but she was not compatible. Her adoptive parents, in fact, had never been very close to her, and now, in this crisis situation, they seemed even more distant, unable to cope with the gravity of the situation, or perhaps, with Eleanor herself in her vulnerability. It was then that her adoptive mother, during a hospital visit, sat by Eleanor's bedside and revealed a secret she had kept for 38 years, a secret that would forever change Eleanor's perception of her own identity. "Eleanor, there's something you need to know," she said, her voice choked with tears, her eyes welling up. "You were adopted." Eleanor didn't move. She expressed no surprise, no anger, no relief. But inside, something stirred. A piece of her life's puzzle, which she had never known was missing, suddenly clicked into place. Your father, the man you called Dad, he was also adopted. We could never have biological children. We tried for years, but it wasn't meant to be. So we adopted you. And you were the best thing that ever happened to us, Eleanor. You always were. The woman, now openly weeping, tried to hold Eleanor's hand, but she gently pulled it away. Eleanor heard the words, but they seemed to come from very far away, like a distant echo. She had been adopted. All her life, she had believed she was this woman's biological daughter, this man's. And now she discovered she wasn't. The revelation, instead of shocking her, brought a strange sense of detachment. It was another lie in her life, another foundation that proved to be false. There were no records of biological relatives. No information about who her real parents were, where she came from. Nothing. The adoption agency had closed years ago, and the files were lost or destroyed. But Eleanor was a woman of action. And even sick, even weak, even scared, she decided she wasn't just going to accept it. She needed answers. She needed a donor. She needed a connection. She hired a private investigator, someone she paid very well, using what remained of her personal fortune, to find answers, to unearth the truth. In a few weeks, the investigator, a shrewd and persistent man, found 3 possible biological siblings. 3 people who shared the same genetic code as Eleanor, but whom she had never known, whose lives had unfolded on completely different paths. Vera, a dance teacher in Miami, Florida. Described as cheerful, outgoing, generous, with a contagious smile and vibrant energy. Gregory, a reclusive artist in Portland, Oregon. Reserved, distrustful, living in a small studio away from the world, surrounded by his works and his own demons. And Natalie, a lawyer in Boston, Massachusetts. Successful, cold, distant, with a reputation for being as ruthless as Eleanor herself in her glory days. Eleanor didn't know how she would feel meeting them. A mix of apprehension, hope, and a strange sense of destiny. But she knew she had to try. She needed to find a compatible donor. And perhaps, just perhaps, she needed to find something more, a connection, a family, something she had never had, something that would fill the void that success and money could never fill. The reunion with Vera was the easiest, the warmest, the most surprising. Eleanor, still weak from chemotherapy, with a debilitated body and a tired soul, traveled to Miami. The city, with its warmth and vibrant energy, was a stark contrast to the coldness of New York City and the loneliness of her apartment. She knocked on Vera's door, a colorful house in Little Havana, her heart pounding in her chest. When Vera opened the door and saw Eleanor, something happened. An instant connection, a deep recognition, as if they had known each other forever, as if time and distance were mere details. Vera, with her curly hair and a smile that lit up her face, welcomed Eleanor as if she had known her forever. There were no intrusive questions, just a tight, warm hug that immediately disarmed Eleanor. She invited her in, made her an aromatic herbal tea, listened to Eleanor's story with genuine attention, cried with her pain, laughed at life's ironies, and hugged her again, conveying a strength and affection Eleanor didn't know she needed. And when Eleanor explained about her illness, about the urgent need for a compatible donor, Vera didn't hesitate. "I'll get tested," she said, with a determination that mirrored Eleanor's, but with a warmth that Eleanor herself had lost. "If I can help you, Eleanor, I will." But a few days later, Eleanor's hope was tested again. Vera received news that, while joyful for her, was a blow to Eleanor. She was pregnant. And because she was pregnant, she couldn't be a donor. She couldn't undergo the bone marrow transplant procedure. Eleanor left Miami with a broken heart from the disappointment, but also with something new and precious, a sister. A real, tangible connection with someone who shared her blood, who had accepted her unconditionally. The pain of losing the donor was softened by the joy of having found a family. Gregory was more difficult. Eleanor traveled to Portland, a city of stunning natural beauty, but one that seemed to reflect the artist's reclusive soul. She found his studio a small, disorganized place, smelling of paint and wood, filled with unfinished canvases and abstract sculptures that seemed to scream emotions. She knocked on the door, and Gregory opened it with suspicion, his gray eyes fixed on her. He was a thin man, with long gray hair, and eyes that seemed to have seen things most people don't, laden with deep melancholy. "Who are you?" he asked abruptly, without preamble. Eleanor explained. Everything. The adoption story, the illness, the search for siblings, the need for a donor. Gregory listened in silence, that distrustful look never leaving his face, as if he were waiting for a trap. "You're lying," he said finally, his voice harsh. "I don't believe in fairy tales." "I'm not," Eleanor replied, her patience tested but her determination unshakable. "I have documents. I have an investigator who can prove everything. I just need help, Gregory." Gregory, without another word, slammed the door in her face. But Eleanor didn't give up. The old Eleanor would have been offended and left. The new Eleanor, more vulnerable and desperate, knew she needed to persist. She returned the next day. And the next day. And the next day. She bought one of his works, an abstract metal sculpture that cost a fortune, but deeply moved her, and placed it in her hotel room, studying every curve, every shadow. She praised his talent, his artistic vision, his ability to express complex emotions through art, leaving anonymous notes at his studio door. And little by little, very little by little, she won his trust, not with money or power, but with persistence and genuine recognition of his work. Gregory, finally, agreed to get tested. Natalie, on the other hand, rejected Eleanor with a coldness that mirrored the coldness Eleanor herself had shown the world for so many years. It was like looking into a mirror. "I don't want to be involved," Natalie said, when Eleanor appeared in her Boston office, an environment as impeccable and impersonal as Eleanor's old apartment. "I don't believe this lost sibling story. And I won't submit to any tests. I have a career to protect, Eleanor, and I won't risk it for a fantasy." Eleanor left that office humiliated, but determined. She left a letter for Natalie, explaining everything, asking for a chance, a moment to talk. Weeks passed without a response. The lawyer seemed like an impenetrable fortress. As the search for her biological siblings unfolded, Eleanor's relationship with Michael deepened in a way she had never imagined. He didn't ask questions about her past, about her company, about why she had lost everything. He didn't judge her. But he was always there. An anchor in the storm. When Eleanor cried alone in the car, on her way to another chemotherapy session, her body exhausted and her soul in tatters, he just drove in silence, leaving her with her feelings, without trying to console her with empty words. When she screamed in anger, anger at the illness, anger at the loss of her empire, anger at having been deceived about her own origin, anger at life's injustice, he listened, with infinite patience, unperturbed. And when she collapsed, literally collapsed, unable to keep pretending she was okay, that she was the Iron Woman, he held her. There was one particular night Eleanor would never forget. She had received a call from her doctor informing her that the chemotherapy side effects were worse than expected. Her hair had fallen out completely, leaving her with a sense of vulnerability she had never experienced. She had lost 40 pounds, her once athletic body now frail and aching. Her body was no longer hers, it was a battlefield where medicine tried to kill the cancer without killing the patient, and she felt like a mere spectator of her own destruction. Eleanor arrived home, opened the door to her silent apartment, and simply collapsed. There was no more strength to stand, to maintain the facade. No more control. No more Iron Woman. The armor had shattered into pieces. Michael, who had driven her home and was waiting to make sure she was all right, found her sitting on the kitchen floor, head between her knees, sobbing convulsively, a guttural sound of pain and despair. He said nothing. He didn't try to hug her immediately, knowing she needed space. He just sat beside her, on the cold kitchen floor, and stayed there. 4 hours. He just stayed there, a solid, silent presence, a pillar of support. Time seemed to stand still. And when Eleanor finally lifted her head, her eyes swollen and red, Michael looked into her eyes, those eyes that had seen so much, that had faced so much, that had witnessed the cruelty of war and the fragility of life, and said something that would change everything, something that penetrated the last barrier of her soul. You are not alone. 3 simple words. But for Eleanor, who had spent her entire life alone, who had built her empire alone, who had faced every crisis alone, who had isolated herself from the world for fear of being weak, those 3 words meant everything. They were a balm for her wounded soul, a promise that, even at rock bottom, someone was by her side. I'm here, Michael continued, his voice calm and firm, without a hint of pity, only acceptance. No matter what happens. No matter what you're going through. I'm here. And Eleanor, for the first time in her life, believed that someone truly loved her. Not for her strength, not for her success, not for what she could do or offer. But for who she was, a weak, scared, lost woman, with a debilitated body and a shattered soul, yet still worthy of love. A love that demanded nothing in return, only the acceptance of her vulnerability. Gregory was compatible. The tests confirmed it. He could be the bone marrow donor Eleanor needed. The news brought a mix of relief and gratitude. The surgery was scheduled for a Monday, at a leading hospital in Boston. Eleanor spent the preceding weekend in a state of mixed anxiety, hope that she could finally be cured, fear that something would go wrong, deep gratitude that Gregory was willing to do this for her, for a sibling he barely knew. Michael stayed by her side the entire time. He helped her pack her bags for the hospital, with a delicacy that contrasted with his physical strength. He drove her there, with his usual calm and steady hand. He waited in the waiting room while she underwent the final tests before surgery, a book open in his hands, but his eyes always attentive to the office door. But the night before the surgery, a new test was performed. A routine test, just to confirm everything was ready, that there were no last-minute complications. And then the doctor entered the room with a strange expression on his face. It wasn't the expression of someone bringing bad news, but neither was it one of relief. It was a mix of confusion, embarrassment, and a hint of surprise. Eleanor, I need to talk to you about something, he said, sitting in the chair beside the bed, his voice more hesitant than usual. Eleanor felt her heart race. Something had gone wrong. She braced herself for the worst, for another devastating piece of news. There was an error in the initial tests, the doctor continued, his voice almost a whisper. The tests were swapped. You do not have acute myeloid leukemia. Eleanor didn't understand the words. They made no sense. Her brain, accustomed to logic and precision, couldn't process that information. There's a patient with the same name, same age, very similar name, admitted on the same day, who is ill. Her tests were marked with your name. And your tests were marked with her name. We discovered the error now, by chance, because the other patient had a complication and we needed to review her entire history. It was an administrative error, Eleanor. A serious error, I know, and I offer 1,000 apologies on behalf of the team. Eleanor felt the ground disappear beneath her feet again. But this time it was different. This time it wasn't despair. It was confusion. It was relief. It was anger. It was everything at once, an avalanche of contradictory emotions. So, I don't have cancer, she asked, her voice almost inaudible. No. You don't. The tests we just performed, and the ones redone with your correct identification, confirm it. You are healthy, Eleanor. You are well. What you experienced was a collapse due to extreme exhaustion and stress, which was exacerbated by the unnecessary chemotherapy. Eleanor didn't know how to feel. Everything she had lived through in the past few months, the fear of death, the physical pain of chemotherapy, the reunions with her biological siblings, the deep and unexpected connection with Michael, had been based on a lie. A medical lie, a grotesque administrative error, but still a lie that had redefined her existence. She had lost her company for nothing. She had undergone chemotherapy for nothing. She had reconnected with her family for nothing. Anger began to bubble up, a silent fury against the injustice, against the negligence. But when she thought about it, when the first wave of anger passed, she realized it wasn't for nothing. Because even if the illness was a lie, the feelings were real. The fear of death was real. The pain was real. The love she had found was real. The connection with her siblings was real. The vulnerability she had allowed herself to feel was real. Eleanor left the hospital a day later, without having had the surgery, without having received the bone marrow transplant. But she left as a different person. The Iron Woman had been forged anew, but this time, with a heart of flesh and blood, not metal. She decided, at that moment, that she wouldn't go back to her old life. She wouldn't go back to the cold apartment in the Upper East Side, to the gilded cage she had built for herself. She wouldn't go back to the endless meetings, to the constant pressure, to the coldness that had defined her existence for so long. The near-death experience, even if based on an error, had been a catalyst, a brutal awakening. She left the presidency of Green Essence in Sonia's hands, who had proven to be far more capable than Eleanor had ever recognized. Sonia, who had tried to care for her for so many years, who had tried to show her that there was more to life than work, finally had the chance to lead the company, to apply her humanity and vision. Eleanor knew the company would be in good hands, perhaps even better, with someone who valued people as much as profits. And Eleanor? Eleanor created a foundation to help patients with acute myeloid leukemia, the disease she didn't have, but which had completely changed her life. She would use her experience, her network, and what remained of her fortune to make a difference in the lives of people who truly faced the battle she thought she had faced. She dedicated herself to rebuilding ties with her new family, with an intensity and affection she never knew she was capable of feeling. With Vera, who gave birth to a healthy baby girl and named her Eleanor, in honor of the sister destiny had brought her. Little Eleanor would grow up knowing her existence was a symbol of love and new beginnings. With Gregory, who finally began to trust someone beyond himself, who found in his sister a support and admiration that pushed him out of his isolation. And with Natalie, who, touched by Eleanor's radical change, by her vulnerability and her new mission, finally agreed to meet her, not as a lawyer, but as a sister. Michael, who had pulled away thinking Eleanor didn't love him, who had thought she saw him only as a driver, as someone useful but disposable, as just another employee, came back. He had felt used, a mere instrument in her journey. But Eleanor didn't let him go. She sought him out, opened her heart to him in a way she had never done with anyone, and convinced him that what they had was real, was deep, was love. Eleanor sold the apartment in the Upper East Side. That cold, perfect, empty place, which had been a symbol of her loneliness and her relentless pursuit of control. She sold it for a price she could have invested in her company, but she no longer cared about money. She sold it and bought a simple house, with a garden, in a quiet neighborhood of New York City. A house where she could plant herbs and flowers, where the smell of damp earth and the birdsong replaced the sterile silence. A house where there was space for the people she loved, where laughter and conversations filled the rooms. Gregory had his first national exhibition. His works, those abstract sculptures that expressed emotions most people couldn't even name, that spoke of pain, hope, redemption, were critically acclaimed. He finally found his place in the world, his voice, his validation, not in reclusion, but in sharing his art. Vera gave birth to a healthy baby girl, just as she had said she would. And that little girl grew up surrounded by love, surrounded by a family that had been brought together by a medical error that became the most right thing that had ever happened in Eleanor's life. Natalie, the cold lawyer from Boston, finally opened her heart. She began using her legal skills to help Eleanor's foundation, working pro bono to ensure that leukemia patients had access to the best treatments, that they had a voice and support. She found a purpose beyond profit, a connection to humanity that transformed her. And Michael? He was there, every day, by Eleanor's side. Not as a driver. Not as an employee. But as a companion. As someone who had chosen to be there, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Because he loved her. They didn't speak of love with grand words. They didn't need to. The silence between them said it all. That silence that had begun on that first car ride, when Michael just drove and left Eleanor with her thoughts. That silence had transformed into something much deeper, a mutual understanding, a complete acceptance, a presence that required no words, just the certainty that they were there for each other. Eleanor learned that life is not about control, but about surrender. That love doesn't demand perfection, but presence, vulnerability, and acceptance. And that, sometimes, you have to lose everything, your company, your reputation, your identity, your health, to finally find what truly matters, what truly nourishes the soul and gives meaning to existence. She learned this every day. When she woke up next to Michael and saw that calm gaze, that silent acceptance that made her feel safe. When she planted flowers in the garden and felt the earth in her hands, connecting with life in a way she never had before. When she received a call from Vera telling her about little Eleanor's first steps, or a new mischief. When she saw Gregory at an art opening, surrounded by admirers, finally believing in his own talent and worth. When Natalie hugged her, that hug that had taken months to happen, but was worth every second of waiting, a hug that sealed reconciliation and fraternal love. The life she had built before, that life of iron, of control, of loneliness, of relentless pursuit of external validation, had disappeared. And in its place, there was something much more beautiful. Something much more real. Something that filled her in a way that success never could. There were days when Eleanor wondered what would have happened if the medical error hadn't occurred. If she had really had leukemia. If she had died. She came to the conclusion that, in a way, she had died. The old Eleanor had died. The Iron Woman had disappeared, carried away by tears and pain. And in her place, a new Eleanor had been born, physically weaker, yes, but also stronger in spirit. More vulnerable, but also braver to love and be loved. More human. And this Eleanor was infinitely better. And so ends the story of Eleanor and Michael. A story of unexpected new beginnings, of rediscovered family ties, and of a love that was born in silence, blossomed in vulnerability, and solidified in acceptance. It is living proof that, even when everything seems to fall apart, life has the capacity to surprise us with gifts we could never have imagined. But this story doesn't end here, not really. Because stories like this, stories of people who lose everything and, in the process, find something infinitely better, something truer and more meaningful, these stories continue. They continue every day, in every decision Eleanor makes, in every moment she chooses to be present instead of controlling, in every time she allows the people she loves to see her weak, without fear of being judged. Because it is in that weakness, in that assumed vulnerability, that true strength resides. It is in the ability to shed masks and accept one's own humanity that we find the courage to live fully. You know, when we started this story, I asked, do you believe love can blossom in the midst of chaos? And now, after getting to know Eleanor, after accompanying her on this dizzying journey of destruction and reconstruction, after witnessing her transformation from an iron woman to a woman with a heart, I am certain that the answer is a resounding yes. Love doesn't blossom in perfect circumstances. Love doesn't blossom when everything is under control, when life is a calm sea. Love blossoms when you are broken, when you are scared, when you are lost, when you have nothing left to offer but your own fragility. Love blossoms when someone looks at you in that state, broken, scared, lost, and, instead of running away, extends a hand and says, "I am here. You are not alone." Michael didn't love Eleanor because she was powerful, because she had an empire, because she was the queen of natural cosmetics. He loved her because she was human. Because she allowed him to see her in her deepest vulnerability. Because she trusted him enough to let that Iron Woman mask fall, to show the exhausted and wounded soul hidden beneath it. And that's why their story is so beautiful. Because it's real. It's a love not based on fantasies, but on the harsh reality of life, on the mutual acceptance of imperfections. In real life, love isn't perfect. Love is complicated. Love is two people choosing to be together, day after day, even when it gets tough. Especially when it gets tough. It's the choice to stay, to support, to love, even when chaos sets in. Now I want to know from you, what part of this story moved you the most? What moment touched you most deeply? Was it the moment Eleanor fainted, realizing the fragility of her own existence? The moment she discovered she didn't have cancer, and the avalanche of emotions that brought? The moment Michael said, "You are not alone," breaking years of solitude? The moment she reunited with Vera, her sister by blood and soul? The moment she finally allowed someone to love her for who she truly was, without masks or defenses? Write it down in the comments. I want to know what part touched your heart, what reflection this story sparked in you. Your perspective is very important to us. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, do it now. Don't miss the chance to be part of our community. There are many emotional stories coming your way, stories of real people, of hearts opening to the unexpected, of lives transforming in ways we could never predict. Stories that will make you laugh, cry, question your priorities, and rethink what truly matters in life. There are stories of love that blossoms against all odds, defying destiny. There are stories of families reuniting after years apart, healing old wounds. There are stories of people who lose everything and find something better, something more authentic. There are stories of courage, of vulnerability, of humanity in its purest form. And you won't want to miss any of them. So subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications to be the first to know when a new story goes live. And come back soon for the next story. Because life is made of stories. And the best stories are those that remind us that we are not alone. That there are other people out there going through the same things we are. That there is hope, even in the darkest moments. That there is love, even in the midst of chaos. That there is always a chance to start over, to reinvent oneself, to find a new purpose. Eleanor Vance learned that. And now you know it too. Thank you for being here with me on this journey. Thank you for listening to Eleanor's story. Thank you for allowing this story to touch your heart and soul. Until the next story.